My fiancée posted photos from her bachelorette party rehearsal with the hashtag ready to mingle. Our wedding was 4 months away. Her friends all commented, "Finally free." I didn't get angry. I didn't say a word. I just quietly liked the post. Then I took another bite of my sandwich and opened 2 new tabs on my computer, one for a moving company and one with a template for a termination of cohabitation agreement. Her free summer was about to begin, but it came with an invoice. I am 31 years old, a software engineer. My life is built on clean code and logical outcomes. You put in the work, you build a solid foundation, and you create something stable, something that works. For 5 years I put in the work. I saved every bonus worked, every hour of overtime offered. All of it went towards a down payment on my apartment, my space, my foundation. It wasn't just about owning property. It was about building a future, a place for a family, for a life built on solid ground, not on shifting sand. Then Chloe moved in. She was 28, and she lived in a world built on a different kind of code. The code of social media. Her reality was curated, filtered, and captioned for public consumption. I built systems designed to be invisible to work perfectly in the background. She built a life designed to be seen. Looking back, the red flags weren't just there. They were giant waving banners in a hurricane. I was just too focused on building to notice the storm. There was the incident after our trip to the coast. I had taken a picture of her genuinely happy with the wind in her hair and no makeup on. I thought she looked beautiful. She posted it, and it only got 74 likes. She was quiet for 3 days. A week later, she posted a heavily edited selfie from that same trip, one where she was pouting at the camera, and it got over 300 likes. She was ecstatic. It was then I realized I wasn't in a relationship with a person. I was in a relationship with an avatar, and her happiness was measured in engagement metrics. Then there was the money. She worked in retail. A decent job, but her taste was strictly high-end. I remember her coming home one day with a new designer handbag, the kind that costs more than our monthly mortgage payment. She said, "I just had to have it. It's an investment piece." For the next 2 months, I covered her share of the bills, because her investment apparently didn't pay dividends in the form of electricity or water. It was a recurring theme, a life lived on credit, propped up by my stability. Her desire for a certain lifestyle was always more important than the reality of our budget. She saw my savings not as a safety net for our future, but as a resource pool for her present. She was obsessed with appearances, not just her own, but ours. She would constantly show me pictures of influencer couples on Instagram. "Look at them," she'd say. "They're always traveling. He just bought her a car. Why can't we be more like that?" I'd try to explain that those lives weren't real. They were highlight reels. Our life, the one with quiet nights in, and careful financial planning that was real. She would just sigh and say I didn't understand. She was right. I didn't understand why a performance for strangers was more important than the partnership we were supposed to be building. The biggest red flag, the one I can now see so clearly it blinds me, came a few months ago. We were sitting on the couch, the very same one I'm sitting on now, finalizing the guest list for the wedding. She laughed, a light, airy sound that meant nothing. She said, "You know, sometimes I feel like I need one last wild summer before I'm an old married woman." I smiled. I told her we could have a wild honeymoon. I thought it was a joke, a silly throwaway line. It wasn't. It was a mission statement. She was just waiting for the right season. But the final act of deception, the one that truly shows the depth of the betrayal, happened on the morning of the post. Just hours before she announced her single summer to the world. We went to a small, expensive bakery downtown to do a final tasting for our wedding cake. I remember the taste of the lemon raspberry frosting. I remember her smiling at me over a tiny forkful of chocolate hazelnut. She took my hand across the table. Her eyes were bright. She said, "I can't wait to be your wife, Liam. It's all I've ever wanted." She was a phenomenal actress. I'll give her that. She deserved an award for that performance. Because while I was tasting cake and imagining our future, she was already mentally packing her bags for a summer without me. She just forgot to tell me. She let Instagram do it for her instead. I drove home in complete silence. The anger I should have felt wasn't there. The sadness, the heartbreak, none of it. It was all replaced by a cold, quiet clarity. A problem had been identified, and now a solution needed to be executed. I walked into the apartment, my apartment, And for the first time I saw it not as a home, but as an occupied territory. Her things were everywhere. Shoes kicked off by the door, a designer purse slung over a chair I'd bought, magazines with impossibly perfect couples on the cover splayed open on the coffee table. It was an invasion of lifestyle, a colonization of my stability, and the occupation was officially over. I didn't hesitate. I walked to my desk. I opened my laptop. The screen illuminated my face in the dim light. I typed clutter.com into the browser. It was a service I'd heard about on a podcast. On-demand storage. They come to you, they pick up your stuff, they store it. Simple, efficient. I selected the medium-sized plan. I scheduled a pickup for 8 o'clock the next morning. The confirmation email arrived in my inbox 7 seconds later. Step 1 was complete. Then I went to the hall closet. I pulled out the stack of flat-packed cardboard boxes I'd kept from when I first moved in. I assembled the first one, the sound of the tape gun echoing in the quiet apartment. I started with her closet. It was a sea of fast fashion, expensive dresses, worn only once for a single photo, and clothes she couldn't afford. I didn't throw them. I folded them, methodically. Sweaters in one box, jeans in another. I was not a scorned lover throwing a tantrum. I was a logistician processing a shipment. I was packing up a defective product being returned to sender. 1 box became 5. 5 became 10. Her shoes took up another 3 boxes entirely. The mountain of makeup and skincare products that had taken over our bathroom filled 2 more. By the end, I counted them. 23 boxes in total. 23 containers of a life I was no longer a part of. I sat on the floor surrounded by the neatly taped-up evidence of our failed engagement. Then I took out my phone. I called my family's lawyer. I kept my voice low, steady. I said, "Hi, David. I have a few questions about protecting personal assets in the event of a broken engagement. What are the necessary steps?" He was straight to the point. He explained the importance of a formal notice, a clear line in the sand that separates what was once shared from what is now solely mine. He gave me the keywords I needed. After the call, I went back to my laptop. I downloaded a standard lease termination notice. My name was the primary on the lease agreement. I filled it out, citing the standard 60-day notice period. Then I found a template for a termination of cohabitation agreement. A simple document stating that our financial lives were now separate. I printed them both. I signed each one with a firm, steady hand. The final step was the most important. I opened the shared email account we had created for the wedding. It was a digital monument to a future that would never happen. One by one, I began to dismantle it. I opened the contract for the reception venue. I scrolled down to the cancellation clause, a 50% penalty. I opened the contract for the photographer, a 30% penalty. The florist, the band, the caterer. I opened a new spreadsheet. I created columns, vendor total cost cancellation fee. I entered the data cell by cell. The numbers added up quickly. The total cost to undo our future was $16,000. I created a final line at the bottom of the spreadsheet. Chloe's share. I typed in the number. $8,000. Justice, I realized, sometimes has an invoice, and I was sending it. She came back the next afternoon, just as I had predicted. She was still wearing the same sparkling dress from the night before, now slightly wrinkled with expensive sunglasses hiding her hungover eyes. She walked in with a practiced air of weary glamour, the kind she'd seen in movies. She kicked off her heels. She said, "Liam, babe, what a crazy night." Then she stopped. The sentence died in her throat. She took off the sunglasses, and her eyes, bloodshot and confused, scanned the empty living room. The echo in the space seemed to startle her. Her first reaction was not concern for us or for me. It was pure, unfiltered panic for her possessions. She said, "Oh my God, were we robbed? My handbag, my new shoes. Did they take my new shoes?" I emerged from the kitchen holding a glass of water. I took a slow sip. I said calmly, "We weren't robbed, Chloe. Your things aren't gone." She stared at me, her mind clearly struggling to process the information through the fog of her hangover. She said, "What are you talking about? Where is all my stuff?" I said, "They've been moved." That's when the performance began shifting through its predictable phases. Phase 1. Denial and minimization. She forced a laugh, a high-pitched, unnatural sound. She said, "Moved. What do you mean moved? Is this some kind of joke? It's not funny, Liam. I said, no, it's not a joke. She started pacing, running a hand through her messy hair. She said, okay, I get it. You're mad about the Instagram post. Look, it was stupid. It was just a caption. A dumb joke for my friends. You know what social media is like. It's not real life. I just stood there, a wall of logic she couldn't find a crack in. I said, your friends seemed to think it was real. They were all congratulating you on finally being free. Her tactics shifted instantly. When facts failed, she turned to emotional attacks. Phase 2, gaslighting. Her voice got louder, more accusatory. She said, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You're always overreacting. You're so insecure. You can't handle me having a little fun. You want to control me. This right here is exactly why I feel so suffocated all the time. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I said, so you posted that you were single because you felt suffocated. She saw that her anger wasn't working, so she pivoted again. Phase 3. The victim. Her face crumpled. The tears started perfectly on cue. They were real tears, I'm sure, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration. The tears of a manipulator who has lost control of the narrative. She sobbed, how could you do this to me? After everything I love you, Liam. I was going to marry you. How can you be so cruel, so heartless, over one stupid tiny mistake? I just watched. I had seen this play before, just on a smaller scale. This was the grand finale. When the tears didn't get the desired response, she reached for her phone. Her final move. She said, her voice dripping with venom. Fine. You want to be a monster, I'm calling my friends. They'll see what you're really like. 20 minutes later they arrived. The rescue squad. Jessica burst in first, her phone already out, as if she was preparing to record evidence of a crime scene. 2 other friends followed, a chorus of righteous indignation. Jessica didn't even look at me. She went straight to Chloe, wrapping her in a dramatic hug. She said, oh my God, honey, are you okay? He's a psycho. Then she turned to me. She said, are you seriously doing this? You're kicking her out over a caption. How toxic can you be? I said. She announced she was single. I'm respecting her decision. Another friend chimed in. She said, it's called having fun, Liam. Not everything has to be so serious. She's allowed to have a life. I replied. And now she is free to have all the fun she wants. Just somewhere else. They just stood there, a wall of emotion, of baseless accusations and trending buzzwords. They threw everything they had at me. Gaslighter, manipulator, controlling. The words were like pebbles hitting a brick wall. They made a lot of noise, but they left no mark, because I wasn't playing their game anymore. I was simply enforcing the rules she had written herself. I let the storm break against me. The chorus of their voices rose in the small living room, a chaotic symphony of accusations. Toxic, controlling, heartless. Jessica was the conductor, her face flushed with second-hand righteousness. Chloe was the lead violin, playing a mournful solo of sobs and sniffles. Her 2 friends provided the backing vocals, a repeating track of, how could you, and this is insane. I stood there. I let them perform. I let them exhaust their script until the only sound left was the echo of their own anger and the ragged sound of Chloe's breathing. The silence that followed was heavier than any of their words. It was a silence I owned, a silence I had created by simply refusing to join their chaos. Then I moved, slowly, deliberately. I walked to the small table by the door where I had placed a thin folder. I picked it up. Their eyes followed my every movement. They were expecting me to shout, to break, to finally give them the emotional fight they so desperately wanted. They were about to be very, very disappointed. I turned to Jessica and the other 2 first. I said, my voice even, and clear, I understand you're here to support your friend. But before this conversation continues, I need to establish a baseline of fact. I pulled out the first document from the folder. I laid it on the coffee table. I said, this is the deed to this apartment. My name is the only one on it. It was purchased 2 years before I ever met Chloe. This is my property. They stared at the paper, their expressions faltering for the first time. Emotions are easy to argue with. A legal document is not. Then I turned to Chloe. I took out the second piece of paper. I placed it on top of the first. I said, this is a formal notice of lease termination. As I am the primary and sole leaseholder of this property, I am giving you the legally required 60 days notice to vacate. Your tenancy here will officially end in 60 days from today." Her sobbing stopped. It was replaced by a stunned, disbelieving silence. Jessica opened her mouth to say something, looked at the official-looking document, and then closed it again. Then I placed the third document on the pile. It was the one I'd printed from my lawyer's template. I said, "And this is a termination of cohabitation agreement. It's a simple document, really. It just formalizes what you've already announced to the world, that as of today we are no longer in a partnership. Any and all financial entanglements between us are hereby severed." Chloe finally found her voice a weak, trembling whisper. She said, You can't do this." I looked at her. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel anything at all. I said, "I'm not doing anything. I'm simply creating the reality that you already created online." Then I reached into the folder for the final time. I pulled out the last piece of paper. It was the spreadsheet I had made, the list of vendors, the list of cancellation fees. I placed it gently on the very top of the pile. I pointed to the number at the bottom, the one I had circled in red. I said, "You wanted a single girl summer, Chloe. Freedom is a wonderful thing, but it's not free." I paused. I let her and her friends lean in to see the number. I said, "The total penalty for cancelling the wedding is $16,000. This is your half." I tapped the paper. $8,000. And that's when the silence became absolute. The wall of noise had been completely and utterly dismantled, not by shouting, but by paperwork, by facts, by consequences. They stood there speechless, staring at an invoice for a future that Chloe had just thrown away. Checkmate. Defeated in the real world, Chloe retreated to the only battlefield where she felt she had power: her social media profile. It was her home turf. That evening, she made her move. She posted a long, rambling, tear-soaked novel of a caption accompanied by a black and white photo of herself, looking wistfully out a window. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She wrote about the pain of leaving a toxic relationship. She hinted at psychological control and being punished for minor mistakes. She painted herself as the brave victim who had finally found the courage to escape her oppressor. And for a little while it worked. The comments flooded in from her followers, the ones who only saw the carefully constructed avatar. "We're so proud of you, you're so strong, men are trash." She was building her narrative, brick by emotional brick. I watched it all happen. I read every comment. I saw every supportive emoji. And I did nothing. For 24 hours, I let her build her castle of lies. I let her feel safe. I let her think she had won back control of the story. A strategist knows that you don't interrupt your enemy when they are in the middle of making a mistake. You let them finish. You let them build their position on unstable ground. Then after a full day had passed, I made my move. I didn't argue. I didn't engage in the comments. I didn't write a long emotional rebuttal. I made a single public post on my own profile. It was clean, it was simple, and it was devastating. The post had only 2 images. The first was a crystal-clear screenshot of her original post, the one with her in the sparkling dress, smiling with her friends with her own words, rehearsing for a free summer, ready to mingle, no settling. The second image was a screenshot of the invoice from the wedding venue showing the cancellation fee. $16,000, with her $8,000 share, clearly circled in red. And my caption was only one sentence. I wrote, "When someone shows you who they are, believe them. And this is the price of believing them. Have a great free summer, Chloe. You've earned it." The effect was instantaneous. It was a digital wildfire. The mutual friends who had been on the fence, the ones who had offered her cautious words of support, suddenly saw the entire chessboard. The logic was undeniable. The timeline didn't lie. The invoice was cold, hard proof. The narrative she had so carefully constructed crumbled into dust in a matter of minutes. The comments on my post exploded. "Wait," she posted. "She was single while you were still engaged. She threw away a wedding over Instagram likes. That is the craziest thing I have ever seen." The tide didn't just turn, it became a tsunami. But the final crushing blow didn't come from me. It came from an unexpected ally. Jessica's boyfriend, a guy I was friendly with, sent me a message. He said, "Dude, I had no idea. Jessica told me you were being controlling." I confronted her, and she admitted everything. Then he sent them, Screenshots. A whole series of them, from a group chat between Chloe, Jessica, and their friends. The messages went back for weeks. They were planning her escape. They discussed which dating apps she should download. They rated guys at her gym. They planned the impromptu bachelorette party. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a joke. It was a premeditated act of betrayal. I didn't post those screenshots online. That would have been messy. Instead, I forwarded every single one of them, in a neat little package, to one person, her mother, Karen. I didn't add any commentary. The images spoke for themselves. Her only response 5 minutes later was a single text message that said everything. It just read, "Oh, Chloe, what have you done?" The 60-day notice period became a real-time case study in the consequences of a life built on illusion. Her single-girl summer didn't start with celebratory brunches and rooftop pools. It started with her sleeping on Jessica's couch. I heard about it through the grapevine, of course. For the first week, it was a slumber party, a festival of freedom. By the second week, the welcome had worn thin. Jessica, it turned out, didn't appreciate Chloe's habit of leaving messes, eating her food, and constantly complaining about the monster I had supposedly become. So Chloe moved on to the next couch on her list, and then the next. Her social circle, which had seemed so vast and supportive online, proved to be quite shallow in reality. By week 3, she had run out of couches. Her only remaining option was to move back in with her mother, Karen. I got a call from Karen that weekend. She sounded exhausted. She said, "Liam, there are boxes everywhere. 23 boxes. I can barely walk in my own studio apartment." I just said, "That sounds frustrating, Karen." She tried to plead Chloe's case, but the argument was hollow. The fantasy had collided with the four walls of a tiny, cramped reality. By week 5, the financial reality hit. The $8,000 debt was a crushing weight. Her retail job, which was fine when supported by my income, was nowhere near enough to sustain her lifestyle, let alone pay off a massive debt. She started calling in sick. She was showing up late. I heard she spent most of her shifts crying in the stockroom. By the end of the month, she had been quietly let go for poor performance. Her single-girl summer had turned into a harsh, unemployed autumn. The Instagram posts of glamorous nights out were replaced by a feed of complete silence. Meanwhile, my life became quiet. Beautifully, blissfully quiet. The chaos was gone. I'd come home from work and the apartment was exactly as I had left it. It was clean. It was calm. It was mine again. The $16,000 wedding fund didn't go back into my savings. Instead, I opened an investment account. I put all of it into a low-risk index fund. I found a quiet satisfaction in turning the cost of a failed future into an asset for my real one. I started reading again. I went to the gym more often. I reconnected with old friends. One Saturday morning, I was at a coffee shop, reading a book, when a woman commented on my choice. She was a lawyer. She was intelligent. She was witty, and she didn't have a single social media app on her phone. We started talking. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was talking to a real person, not a curated brand. On the 60th day, the final day of the notice, Chloe came by one last time. She was there to pick up a few small things she'd left behind. She looked diminished. The spark of social media validation was gone from her eyes. She was just a tired, defeated woman standing in the doorway of a life she had set on fire. As she was leaving, she turned. She said, her voice barely a whisper, "I did love you, you know." I looked at her, and for the first time, I saw her with complete clarity, free from any lingering emotion. I said, "No. You loved the idea of a wedding. You loved the lifestyle and the stability I provided. There's a difference." Then I closed the door. It's been a few months now. My apartment is quiet. Not empty quiet like it was after I first moved her things out, but a peaceful kind of quiet. The kind of quiet that lets you hear your own thoughts. I'm sitting here now on my couch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun rise over the city, and everything is calm. My friends tell me I was lucky. They say the whole thing played out like a perfectly written movie. The revenge was clean, the consequences were clear, and the villain got exactly what she deserved. They say it couldn't have ended better. And when I look at it from the outside, I guess they're right. It was a neat, tidy ending. But I keep asking myself a question, over and over again. What if it hadn't gone so perfectly? What if my post on social media had been ignored? What if Chloe had been more successful at painting herself as the victim, And I had lost a few friends in the process. What if her life hadn't imploded and she had just moved on? Would my decision in that moment still have been the right one? There's a concept for this, a mental trap we all fall into sometimes. It's called outcome bias. It's the tendency to judge a decision based on the result it produced, instead of on the quality of the decision at the time it was made. And my answer to that question is absolutely yes. 100% yes. My decision was still the right one, because the real victory wasn't seeing her life fall apart. The real victory wasn't in the social media takedown, or the $8,000 invoice, or the validation from our friends. Those were just consequences, side effects. The real victory, the true win, happened in that quiet moment in my office. It happened when I was faced with a public declaration of disrespect, and instead of choosing anger or weakness, I chose a quiet, deliberate action in defense of my own self-worth. The victory happened the second I clicked like on her post and started packing those 23 boxes. The success of leaving a toxic situation isn't measured by how badly the other person fails. It's measured by the peace you reclaim for your own soul. Her downfall was just karma settling an account she had overdrawn. But the victory of character, that was mine the moment I decided that my future was worth more than her performance. The real win wasn't in watching her fall. It was in learning how to stand up for myself and walk away.